Hello and welcome to the Chosson and Kallah Shmooze You Wish You Had But Never Got, Part 11. I remind everybody, especially as we are getting to more and more sensitive material about sexuality and Jewish thought, I ask that you listen to the entire series from beginning to end. It is important that you develop the proper foundation and the understanding of the entire approach, and you're able to integrate each discussion in your learning. So I ask that you Google Chosson and Kallah Shmooze You Wish You Had But Never Got intro. Intro is the first one, and then it should automatically take you through from one video to the next. Also, for those of you who are interested, there is a PDF of much of the material in this discussion. As we start to talk about in the last discussion, there is a special mitzvah to give sexual pleasure. This mitzvah is not having to do with sexual reproduction. This has nothing to do with pruavu, with the commandment to be fruitful and multiply. This is merely a mitzvah in the Torah that a man is obligated to give his wife sexual pleasure. Now, it's fascinating because we remarked on this point that what about a man's sexual pleasure? And to this, it's important to realize a principle in the Torah in general, and oftentimes a principle in the Torah having to do with Bein Adam Lechavero, and that is that the Torah seeks to protect the underdog. The Torah stresses the downtrodden, the person who is less likely to have a voice or to have rights. Now, when it comes to sexual pleasure, the ontological realities of sexual pleasure is that oftentimes the man is able to secure his own pleasure far more easily and rapidly than a woman is able to. Additionally, for some reason, again, this is just an ontological truth, and this is the patterns that the Creator embedded within us. A woman can be sexual even if she's not aroused. She can even reproduce if she's not aroused. Now, oftentimes that leads to painful and difficult sex, or at least sex that is not comfortable and personally violating. However, the facts of the matter are that a man cannot be sexual unless he is aroused, and a woman can be. And therefore, the Torah must go out of its way to stress the importance and the mitzvah of being the one, that the man must be the one to provide sexual pleasure for his wife. Very interesting proof text comes from a surprising place. The pasuk in Shmooze, in Exodus 25:21, Chaf Hey, Chaf Aleph says, Kol almana v'yasom lo sa'anun. You shall not treat poorly, afflict a widow or an orphan. Rashi, quoting the Mechilta over there, makes an important point. He says that this law of not afflicting the widow and the orphan actually applies to anybody, meaning we are forbidden to unduly cause distress to anybody. However, Rashi saying, Diber hakosov bahove, the Torah is talking about the usual circumstance, meaning who is the person that has no voice? Who is the person that is unable to get the succor and to get the protection as easily? That's the widow and the orphan, because especially in ancient society, they had less rights and they certainly were less able to defend themselves. So the Torah goes out of its way to make a specific example out of the widow and the orphan, but actually it's forbidden to mistreat and cause distress to anybody. Now, we can apply that same logic that the Torah goes out of its way and delineates that it is an obligation to give sexual pleasure to a woman because they are less likely to be able to find that without the assistance and the love and the caring of their spouse. Furthermore, maybe we even could stretch this Rashi further if Rashi based on this Mechilta, is saying that in truth, the Torah is only talking about a general example, because generally those are the people that do not get their needs met easily without others caring for them. So if we were to take that position, then it's even possible to argue that it is a mitzvah for a wife to give a husband sexual pleasure too, even though it's not stated explicitly. And that is because, again, usually a man can have pleasure without that. But in any case, that would be a big chiddush. What is not a chiddush and what is clear is that it's an obligation for a man, specifically in the Torah, to give a woman sexual pleasure. And here is a very important point. Although colloquially, many people refer to sexuality as, quote, the mitzvah, close quote, and indeed it is a mitzvah. As we said, it is not only a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, it's a mitzvah just to be sexual and provide sexual pleasure within the parameters of Jewish marriage. But on top of that, the mitzvah is not necessarily only sexual intercourse. And this is a key point, because many people who are not taught properly as chassanim and as kallahs believe that the mitzvah is strictly sexual intercourse, and that is absolutely not so. First of all, it's forbidden to be sexual with somebody who is not properly ready to be sexual. The Gemara in Psachim on 49b Mem Tesamud Beis says that if you marry your daughter to a uncouth, uncivilized person, you are like giving her over to a lion. And the Gemara is quite explicit. The Talmud says that just like a lion eats its meat raw and tramples it, so too this uncouth, unlettered, unmannered person will end up being sexual without preparing his wife. Furthermore, the Tosfos in Yevamis on 62b, Samach Beis Amud Beis, actually is explicit in saying that Tashmish o shar dvorim vayedaber el liba. He says that being sexual and other things, presumably meaning hugging and kissing, and even speaking to her heart, can be a fulfillment of the obligation of the mitzvah of Ona. You could also look in Yoredeya, Kuf Pei Dalid, Sif Yud, the Ramah. You could look in the Taz, Sif Katan and Tezvav, Piskei Tshuva, Sim Chav Beis over there. It's very clear that all types of touching and loving are part of the mitzvah of Ona. And not only that, but that mitzvah of giving sexual pleasure, which we call the mitzvah of Ona, not only that, really, in order to do the job properly, you need to start with other kinds of appeasement. And that appeasement begins much earlier. It might begin days before you're sexual. It might begin a week or two when the person you want to be with is forbidden to you. In fact, an unfortunate byproduct of the war between the sexes, as it were, is that many times women feel only valued for their bodies. Now, that's not necessarily so, of course, and every man can and should desire his wife and be attracted to her and her looks and her body. And sexual desire and sexual gratification is extremely important. However, if a man does not work during the period of nida, during the period where you're forbidden to be sexual, if a man does not work on developing emotional connections and emotional ties, the imbalance and the unconscious fact that more weight and more attention is given to the physical gratification as opposed to the emotional intimacy will lead many women to feel, and some men, but many women to feel as if they're being valued for their bodies and not for their souls or their personality or their other forms of intrinsic worth. So this is a key point. The form of sexual gratification includes romance, as Tosfos said that we quoted, Vayedaber el liba, to speak to her heart. Romantic talk is an important part of the whole arousal process. And now, let us not forget, one last part of the sexual process, which many of us forget, and perhaps there is to some degree a male physiological challenge, which is oftentimes after a man has reached his climax. Oftentimes he may feel very tired and want to doze off. Oftentimes women, either because they have not had enough sexual pleasure, or even as a result of having a lot of sexual pleasure, and women can orgasm many times, and we'll discuss that later on in another discussion, but they will want to bond and connect. Oftentimes that's when they'll want to have pillow talk, and the man goes and falls asleep. Now, oddly enough, the Medrash actually picks up on this. It's fascinating. It's a Medrash Rabbah where it says explicitly that when Adam Harishon was sexual with his wife for the first time, he fell asleep. The Medrash Rabbah asks, what exactly happened to Adam Harishon? Because the Nachash, the serpent, was having a conversation with Chava all this time, and Adam Harishon, man, Adam, was not around. Where was he when she was talking to the serpent? And Bereshis Rabbah, Parsha 19, says he was asleep after they had sex. So that is a pretty strong criticism of man in general, and his tendency to ignore his wife's needs after being sexual. And look what trouble that brought. Let me just add one final point, which is that there are people who feel that in their youth or otherwise, they committed sexual crimes, they committed sexually immoral acts, and they carry that guilt with them. And it's difficult when you carry that kind of guilt to feel that you have adequately done what you need to do to obtain forgiveness if you're a religious and devout person. I offer the following thought for you. If when you feel no more desire after you've had your climax, and you no longer feel driven by your own lust, if you still provide your wife with love and caressing and tenderness and pillow talk, if you do that and you have no lust yourself or very little lust, you are actually doing the mitzvah of being sexual completely lishma, completely for its own sake, with no ulterior motives. And what could be a greater repair than that?